HRTAC, and its funding projects include celebration and opening of the first 6 miles of I-64 Peninsula widening project, groundbreaking of the I-64 Southside widening high-rise bridge project, insurance of the HRTAC's first bond and starting of the TIFIA funding process, awards for $150 million in smart scale funding, establishment of the floor of the regional wholesale gasoline tax, advanced design build of the HRBT under a P3 procurement process, awards of contract for construction of the I-64, I-264 interchange phase 2 project, initiating HRTAC's funding efforts to advance our next project through the Bower Hills Interchange 460-5813 and the regional connector study. I want to recognize the great working relationship with Governor Northam's cabinet, the Commonwealth Transportation Board, VDOT, HRTPO, our member jurisdictions, and our state legislators. Through this relationship, we have planned and funded and advanced projects that are delivered on unlocking Hampton roads. Looking into 2019 business year, today's agenda continues to position Hampton roads for success with the delivery of the vision that our founders in the legislative saw as they created HRTAC and the Hampton Roads Transportation Fund. I want to thank each and every one of you. All right, moving on. Number 5 is our consent calendar. Consent items. We have 6 items on our consent item. Is there any items that any member would wish to pull, or may I have approval on the consent calendar? So move. Second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. All right. Action items. Our first action item, A, I'll turn that over to Mayor Johnson.
The Personnel Committee met, and actually the first solicited feedback from the committee members. First of all, we want to thank you because just about virtually everyone returned their report, and the numbers for Kevin were very, very high marks. He received only wonderful comments and marks. The committee feels a number of things. That we feel that Kevin's continuing employment is very important to the successful completion of the HRBT project, and therefore they do recommend extending his contract through 2024. The contract would have all terms the same. It would be terminable with the 1-year severance as it reads now. Nothing else would change about the contract, only the continuation through 2024. The committee further recommended a 2.5 COLA for him and his staff, and that was the committee's recommendations.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. All right, any discussion on this item? All right, may I look for approval? Motion? Second? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? All right, moving on to number B, the election of 2019 officers for the commission. Tom, let's set the guidelines first before we start.
Certainly. So under the bylaws, the election of the commission's officers consists of the chair and vice chair, and it's held at the annual meeting, this meeting, first meeting in June. In accordance with the bylaws, the chair appointed a nominating committee. After I'm done explaining the process, the chair will recognize the nominating committee chair, Mr. Porter, who will make a presentation on the committee's recommendation for both offices. Then the election of each office will be considered separately. The nominating committee chair will make his motion regarding the office of the chair. If seconded, that person will become a nominee. Under the bylaws, further nominations may be made by any member. If a member desires to make a nomination, he or she would make a motion. If seconded, that person would also become a nominee. After the nominating period is closed, the chair will repeat all the nominations in the order they were received. If there is only one nominee, the chair may use the commission's voice voting procedures unless a member requests roll call voting. If there are multiple nominees, roll call voting will be used for each nominee, proceeding in the order in which the nominations were made. When a nominee receives the requisite votes, he or she shall have been elected, and voting on further nominees discontinues. If none of the nominees receive the requisite votes, the floor will be reopened for additional nominees, and the process will begin again. After the office of the chair is filled, the election of the vice chair will be conducted in the same manner.
Thank you, Tom. All right, Chair Porter, you're up.
After multiple discussions, the nominating committee decided that we would like to propose the re-election of Supervisor Heppel for chairman for the coming year.
All right, is there any other nominations on the floor? Do I hear a second? I have a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Okay. Now we'll move into vice chair. Thank you.
Also, for the vice chair, after multiple discussions with the vice chair, who has agreed to for a second year, the nominating committee would like to recommend re-election of Mayor Johnson for the vice chair for the coming year.
Second. Any others? All right, all in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Okay. Thank you all very much. Congratulations, you too. I think. All right, let's see. 6. All right, our meeting dates. You want to go over the meeting dates?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The meeting dates for this coming fiscal year's calendar are before you as action item 6C as in cat. We'll meet on the third Thursdays in September, in March, in June, and then the Thursday in December the 13th, our regular meeting will be held earlier 1 week due to holiday timing. Unless anyone from the state legislature has a crystal ball on next year's calendar that might be able to assist me, I think we're okay on March 21st. Is that correct?
We'll be fine. We don't have to have a budget next year. We got a 2-year budget.
There you go. Good job on that. So for everyone else's reference as well, if you turn the page on your document, you'll also see where we sync up with the TPO, Harumfa, and also the PDC meeting schedule as well. So we'll kind of add a glance, a full picture for you as to where we're standing within that confine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to you for any questions and also the motion.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, may I have a motion? Second?
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? All right. All right, next information items. HRTAC monthly financial report, and that's Senator Wagner. On to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if you're looking behind the little blue section in your handout, you'll see the financial report for HRTAC, just kind of in summary right now. As of the 31st of May, we had $1,105,000,000 between the bond proceeds and those things that we've invested in various investment accounts. I will point out that from April to May, it's significant in that we had 1.106 billion. We finally, and we talked about this point where we stop going up and start heading down in terms of the amount of money that we have on deposit. So I think this is kind of an important tipping point in that it's good news actually that we are getting so much construction work done now that the collections that we're taking are not keeping up with the construction work. And that means we got a lot of projects ongoing. So this is a trend I suspect you will continue to see. And as we move forward, and certainly when HRBT starts to come online, you'll see that trend happen very, very quickly. But I think it's just a testament to all the good work over at VDOT to get these projects on and up and going. So So we've kind of hit a high water mark in terms of what we physically have on hand, and I suspect this trend will continue, hopefully very slowly. Project's ongoing, but a slow, trend to watch. So I will also point out that because of the actions that we took in the General Assembly session this year, starting 1 July, we should see an uptick in the fuels tax collections, which may help offset all of that, and that's a result of putting in what we refer to as the floor on the regional gas taxes. So we suspect that we'll see a fairly significant increase in revenues that have been long needed. So with that, unless somebody has any questions, hearing none, that completes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I appreciate you and your team and all the work you've done for this group. It's a lot of effort put into that, so if y'all get a chance, give them a handshake and tell them thank you for the good
Mr.
job.
Chairman, if I could
Yes, sir.
interrupt one more time. If you haven't gotten notified or you don't have a tick on your cell phone, you'll all be need to know that the Supreme Court just ruled that states can collect sales taxes on all internet sales, which should make every mayor and chair happy, since a percentage of that comes back to the localities. And certainly Chris and I are over here talking about it right now, along with the other members of the legislature. In terms of what the implications are, we're not quite sure, although when we first took a look at this, back when we were doing the transportation bill, among other things, it was estimated that $800 million per year would be the impact. Now, I don't think it's that big, particularly in light of some of the things we've done in terms of being able to tax Amazon because of the physical nexus, which will reduce that number significantly, along with some of the other online providers that have a physical nexus in Virginia. So it'll be a substantial number, but it certainly won't come anywhere close to $800 million. And because of the action that it took, if you get into the enabling legislation of HRTAC, the funding stream, actually not just HRTAC, but indeed the entire $1 billion of new revenue for transportation, in there, it said if the Congress passed a bill requiring all internet sales collections, then that new source of revenue would go away. Well, Congress didn't pass a bill. It was the Supreme Court action that actually caused it. So there's no immediate concern, although we need to watch that very carefully in the actions of Congress to see if they follow up with some type of legislation, because it would have a huge detrimental impact to transportation all over the state if we don't do that. So just to be aware of those kind of things. And as it gets closer and you all put together your legislative packages, we may ask the localities to include in their isolating the transportation funding from that particular legislation as one of the things you'd like to see happen and accomplished during the session. And that will provide us some additional ammunition. We go up there to try to ensure that we don't do anything to upset the current streams of transportation funding.
Thank you very much. All right, next on the information will be D, VDOT HRTAC project update, HRBT, and Administrator Hall's here, and Director Utterback, I think you were going to give us a report on that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a few things I will cover for
Thank
our current projects. Just starting with our Peninsula projects right now, Segment 2. If you've driven that, you'll see we're continuing to work on the Phase 1 work, which is those median structures, the drainage, bridge decks, parapets, and the paving work on the inside shoulder. And then you'll also see the lane shifting, which will start, our next phase of that will start really about the first week after the July 4 holiday, and it'll be about every week and a half after that. We'll have our next series of lane shifts working from the western side of the project to the east. That also on the outside shoulder is the Phase 2 work, and that's all the full depth reclamation and pavement work that we're doing to get that extra length on the shoulder there. That project remains on schedule and is projected for completion May of 2019. Segment 3, which is the next reach to the west, we've continuing our field surveys in our roadway, the bridge borings, and the geotechnical work up there. The contractor will begin the interstate maintenance on that segment starting in July. And we have a public meeting scheduled June 27th, that's at 5 to 7 p.m. at Bruton High School in Williamsburg. So that'll be our first public meeting on that project. That's scheduled to complete September of 2021, and it remains on schedule. Moving to our I-264-64 interchange projects, the Phase 1, which is a ramp D7. You can see if you've driven by that project, we're working on now the deck pours. We completed our first deck pour last week, and we poured the first 3 of the 13 spans, and that work will continue. Also continuing the deck pan erection as well as the steel girder erection on those bridges. That project remains on schedule and is scheduled to complete in October of 2019. The Phase 2 of that project, which will extend all the way to Witch Duck, we're continuing to perform the utility relocations, sewer and water lines along the Newtown and Greenwich roads, continuing to perform demolitions of existing buildings throughout the project, and really just clearing and grubbing operations for the approaches to the I-264 flyover. That project remains on schedule, and it is scheduled to complete September of 2021. Next is the I-64 South Side widening and the high-rise bridge project. The initial phase of our construction is scheduled to begin on July, next month. This is non-critical work, so the contractor is trying to get ahead of schedule, and most of that will be what we call the land substructure on the bridge itself. Our critical path for that is working the permitting actions, 408 and 401 permits with the Corps, remaining dialogue with them, and we don't anticipate any issues with that, but that permit is scheduled to be released October-November timeframe of 2018, which remains fine for our schedule. That project is scheduled for completion July 2021 and remains on schedule. The last 3 items I'll cover are the ongoing studies that we have funded. First is the 264 Phase 3. This is really to cover the remaining interchanges on 264. All of our traffic data collection has been completed, and we're working on the IMR framework document for review by Federal Highway. Also continuing to develop the baseline existing traffic volumes for that study. Next is the 460-5813 corridor study. We're currently completing the technical studies on that and compiling the environmental assessment documentation. We think that the EA work will be ready for public review sometime late summer, early fall this year. And then lastly is the Bowers Hill interchange. We had a very successful virtual public meeting on that, very good response. Both the Corps and EPA has concurred with our initial project methodologies, and our primary alternatives are being developed and are scheduled to be available for review sometime in August. Mr. Chairman, that completes my update, pending any questions.
Any questions for Administrator Hall? I'd like to thank you for all the hard work that VDOT's doing to help us in this project. And also, if we're getting ready to start one, if I could ask that we do a ribbon cutting so that the members here and any other members that want to join can be part of the ribbon cut, like Section 3. We do it on a 64. If we can do a little ribbon cutting, and that way it shows the public how well we're all working together in order to move transportation.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Will do, sir.
All right, Director Utterback.
Good afternoon. I'm going to just take a few minutes and I think a number of you saw the presentation I gave at the TPO. This won't be the same presentation, I'll spare you. It'll be a little bit shorter, but it is a little bit more focused because of the role of this board. I think it is important, and I saw your timelines on meetings. This is a $3 billion project funded by the people in this room. So it is, from that standpoint, as I walk through, and we'll spend some time on the procurement schedule because that is important, and probably maybe you may want to consider on your meeting schedule to try to make sure you have visibility and everything that goes on with the project. So this is, I think the last time I showed a 1957 picture. This is actually a 2018, about a month ago picture, and this is from Hampton, looking at the backside of the North Island, pointed toward, obviously, the South Island and Fort Wool there going into Norfolk. It is interesting, just one observation here is the South Island, you can see, is quite a bit larger than the North Island. So it's well done back in 1974 when they put in the second crossing. That is probably from a geotechnical, the highest risk on the project is down around the South Island. There's a lot of inorganic material, and the good material is probably 60-plus feet down. So just a picture there. Just to retouch on the scope, I did talk about this at the last meeting. The project essentially goes from Settlers Landing Interchange, where I think it's mile marker 267, and goes over about 9.5 miles into Norfolk 276. It stops just short of 564. So the NEPA work is just short of the 564 interchange. And I'll share that because that is a point of significance there, and I'll tell you how we're addressing that. So it will be 6 lanes of highway all the way through. So at Settlers Landing, everybody knows that's where we go from 3 lanes to 2 lanes to line up and get into the existing tunnel facilities. So that is, we will have 6 lanes through, and we will have 4 lanes over underwater. So the bridge and tunnel facility will be 4 lanes. The new tunnel will primarily, and this is our concept, so just make sure we understand that. So this is what we have as a base concept, which would be the new tunnel would carry the 4 lanes eastbound. The 2 existing tunnels would both carry traffic westbound. So that's how we are going into it. The project estimate right now is at $3.6 billion, a little bit higher than I think what Mr. Page has in the finance program. That is in 2024 dollars. We worked closely together to make sure we're talking apples and apples from that standpoint. Just to bring this point out, and again, as I want to make sure I caveat, we are in procurement, and you'll see that in the table here in a few minutes. We have put, at least initially in the draft RFP, these 3 options. We haven't really fully developed how we're going to do them, but one of them is the direct connect ramps into the 564 interchange. So we've been analyzing that and looking at that continuously. We are doing a reevaluation, so the NEPA document we have is still as stands, but we have gotten Federal Highways approval to look at a reevaluation to environmentally clear the 564 interchange. In addition to that, we are looking at potentially purchasing a parcel at Willoughby Spit, and that would be a construction staging area, which was not inside the NEPA footprint, so we'll be doing that as well. The third piece of the reevaluation is the SEIS stated we would have a managed option. So as part of that managed option, we've gone back to do the reevaluation to get that cleared for a hot lane, if you will. So we did have 2 public meetings the last 2 nights, one in Norfolk and one in Hampton. So really, I think 150 plus people between the 2 meetings. So a lot of involvement, a lot of comments. So we will work through that environmental process to try to get it complete before we issue the final RFP, because that is a risk item for the contractors going forward. So I say that the other 2 kind of things we're looking at, one is trying to address the height issue on the current westbound tunnel. So we've got several approaches in our mind, so we put that in and going to give the contractors a look at that. And then we also are looking at the replacement of the marine approach bridges. That is a big ticket item. We've been in a number of discussions with Mr. Page, and we'll try to keep that in initially and see where we go. There may be some efficiencies of scale in building this in this project to try to address that, and funding we'll have to work through. Again, funding is really the key at this point. 2 + 1 + 1, just to make sure everybody's on the kind of the same page, we would remain the 2 general purpose lanes. This is really kind of a typical concept for a bridge approach going to the tunnel. Tunnel shoulders would be much tighter than that, but basically 2 general purpose lanes, 1 hot lane and 1 part-time hot shoulder, all on the inside. So we're currently analyzing the shoulder lane and trying to get federal highway approval for that. So it's all in work as we go. So I want to just talk 2 slides, one on landside construction and one on marine construction. So it's really broken down into 2 cities, Hampton and Norfolk. And we went and talked to Mayor Alexander and the City Council in Norfolk just a couple weeks ago. We're going to go up to Hampton and have the same meeting with City Council there, Mayor. So we'll be seeing you in July, just to go over kind of the impact of the project. You can see really environmental right-of-way, maintenance, traffic are going to be big challenges in both cities. In Hampton, again, we will be completely reconstructing the Mallory Street interchange. You cannot fit the additional lanes underneath the existing bridge, so that that bridge over top will need to be reconstructed. So it's very tight in there, very tight with the right-of-way. The construction of the roadway, really approach bridges will require phasing because we're really tight on the right-of-way, so it'll be a number of phase construction as we go through that. And the cultural resources really continue to be, really the whole project's kind of pinned in the existing right-of-way with the cemetery, Hampton University, and the Phoebus area, all historic cultural resources from that standpoint. In Norfolk, the constraints at the Bayville interchange, Bayview when you come across, and the Willoughby Bay bridges are probably the biggest challenge in how we touch and tie in on the Norfolk side. There are 4 interchanges we'll go through, and then of course we have the Naval Air Station border on the west side of the project, and we have a cemetery on the east side down close to the Granby Street. So that's as you can imagine, there isn't really anything easy on this project from that standpoint. The marine bridges, these are, they have risk. Obviously, any marine construction has risk, but these are largely conventional bridges. You can see them out there. It will be some risk associated with that, but really the tunnel work is less conventional, and that's really the greatest cost and schedule risk. This is, I said before, and I'm not going to go through all the tunnel slides we had before, but this is a rare location where you can have an immersed tube tunnel and a bore tunnel compete. So the technology allows this boring is feasible in the soft soils now. So we're continuing to take both methods forward. We have asked the contractors to declare their method by the end of July. So we'll have an idea where we stand because it's really important as we go through the procurement. As you know, Thimble Shoals competed both tunnel types in 2015 and received, I think it was 4 bore tunnel proposals. Marine stakeholder involvement. So I mentioned in the first slide the geotechnical risk that really comes into play with the bore tunnel machine because it needs a harder or stiffer soil to run the machine through. But that is something that we can characterize and we're working through, and they will need to design. So there's a big risk on the geotechnical. Probably the largest risk to the project right now is the access to the federal channel. So we've had marine stakeholder involvement. I've been on a little bit of a series of meetings with a number of and discussions with all of the maritime stakeholders. So you can see the list that I went through multiple times with the Navy, the Coast Guard, the Maritime Association, and the Port Association. The concerns clearly are same thing with similar to the deeper widening of the channel, but the commercial vessels, the size and number, and then also the coordination. It looks like the channel widening will hit about the same time as this project. So coordination with that effort, and then of course the naval vessels, and they've been made very clear their security requirements with the movement of warships in the channel. So we've shared all of that with both contractors. So we've got letters that we've shared with both contractors from all the marine stakeholders, and we'll continue to assess that work as we go forward as they make their determination, because that is, as we shared with it, that is a risk that the contractor takes on based on his means and methods. So that's not a shared risk, but it is a project risk. Okay, so I'm going to take a minute and just go through this. Overall, we started the procurement with the RFQ in December 15. We're going to go through what's probably about a year, which is about average for the couple projects that I've seen in the nation that are about this size. We are using the P3 procurement, which gives us the flexibility primarily to work with the contracting teams. So what you'll see is as I mentioned before, we shortlisted 3 teams. One team actually dropped out just prior to us meeting with them before we released the draft RFP. So we released the draft RFP on May 22nd. So if you're into computers or bytes or whatever, so that was the draft RFP had 16 gigabytes of information that we provided to the contractors. This is not a ordinary procurement, so a ton of information. We got a lot of questions back. We're going to release the second draft here next week, so June 29th. We are having meetings right now. We had the first meeting in June. We'll go through 5 more meetings where we discuss, and they will go through what we call ATCs, alternative technical concepts. So there's tough areas, tight spots. We expect to have a number of concepts from these teams, whether they take the ITT bore, whether they do one 4-lane box or 2 separate boxes, or they do a bore with a single bore or twin bore, or they try to bore between the tunnels. We've left a lot of innovation there for these contractors to work with, and we'll work through that over the next three months or so. The final RFP kind of pencils down will go out in September. So what's key to the September date is typically we have in VDOT a pretty good assurance of the funding that's lined up. So one of the discussions with the contractor is what is the maximum amount that we're working for. So continued dialogue with Mr. Page on that as we try to get a number in there for them to work with. With the scope options and the things we've got in the work, it's critical that we try to get everybody working to the same thing. So I know you all have meetings and you're funding from that standpoint, but September is a date for us that we are going to release something that has pretty assurances. Every single meeting starts with the status of the funding. So the contractors are most concerned. They probably will spend upwards of $10 million on their proposals. So each one of the teams. So from September 10th, we will have potentially one more meeting if needed, and we'll go into October with a final change if is needed, and their proposals will come to us November 30th for the technical. So we will score those technical proposals before we get the price. The price is scheduled to come in January 10th right now. So those are 2 hard dates that I'm working toward, and we're moving things a little bit back and forth, but the November and the January are the hard dates. And I want to just point out selection of a best value proposal. So that is significant for a project of this size for this region because the percentages of difference can be hundreds of millions of dollars. And I'll just share from the Tappan Zee Bridge, which is the large bridge in New York, the difference between number 1 and number 2, I think, was close to $800 million. So just as you know, as we go in that, we have 2, ideally we want them close together. So from that standpoint, and we do want technically responsive proposals. So that'll be a thing. Right now we have a 60-40 best value. So 60% price, 40% technical. And so we're working through the scoring on that right now. I told Mr. Page we can come back in September and go through a little more detail. That is critical to selecting the right team to build the project. We'll go to the CTB briefing in February. There is a statutory audit. There is execution of a comprehensive agreement, which will primarily be the design-build contract. It's set up very similar to the existing design builds we have from that standpoint. And then again, a steering committee meeting. This is all required by code following the process, and a notice to proceed in March of 2019. And we're looking at just a 5.5 years, so 2024 completion. This is my favorite slide, so. It's not Photoshop, by the way. And every time I look at it, so that is not Photoshop. So I always think to myself, either they wanted to make sure, be absolutely sure that they got the end right, or those guys in 1957 had a pretty good sense of humor, right? So anyway, Chairman, any questions?
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, thank
Yes.
you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, a couple of questions. As it relates to accessing the hot lanes, the full-time and the part-time hot lanes, talk about that more, and I'll, if I
Okay.
give you, get to the question, I get to the question, or you just can talk about it more.
Yes, sir. And we've looked at that a number of ways, and what we found, right now, the concept is you would get into the hot lanes at Settlers Landing. So we would set up to move traffic, if they're going to go into the hot lanes at Settlers Landing as they start into the approach bridges. And they would not get out until they got to the 564 interchange. Likewise, coming west or northwest on 64, you would get in at 564, just north of 564, and you would get out at Settlers Landing once you crossed.
So here's the question. So motorists who are on Shore Drive, Virginia Beach, Norfolk Shore Drive, how would they access the hot lane without going towards Corner or increasing traffic on Ocean View Ave to figure out a way to
Right.
so I don't, I'm not
So
quite
so
following that.
they wouldn't. What we modeled, Mayor Alexander, was when we had a break in it, again, staying in when you have these hot lanes, we don't have kind of what I call 66 scenario where they had the ability to push out and have direct connect ramps. If you don't have direct connect ramps, you have basically a slip ramp or opening. And that creates a friction and slows the traffic down, and it performs much, much worse with the brakes. So what we did, again, is trying to, move traffic and reduce congestion. We just have them right now at the end. So ideally, people would get into the hot lanes, would ease capacity for the general purpose lanes.
So the residents and motorists around the Bayville, Shore Drive corridor, Diamond Springs corridor, Ocean View Ave, East Beach, where we're trying to reduce congestion, this won't solve that problem.
Ideally, the traffic would be in the new lanes would help that problem. Yes, sir. That's what model, and I can show more data offline if that helps. Yeah.
And last question, accessing from Fourth View,
Right.
how will we reduce congestion at that ramp?
And again, the way it currently works, the tunnel congestion backing up is creating the congestion at Fourth View, which goes down and creates it kind of is it's a choke that backs all the way up, and the secondary system fails as well. So ideally, if we can increase, the capacity or congestion, then it should alleviate the congestion from Fourth View. I know that's how we're looking at it. I mean, that's one thing to consider, is whether we bring that in or open that up a little bit from that standpoint. Typically, if we run the whole way, the less in and out you have, the less friction you have, or basically a breakdown in level of service from that standpoint. But that's what we've modeled to date. We're having a model run right now, traffic model run right now, looking at that and the shoulder lane as well. So it's not a complete done deal, but that's what we're looking at.
So let me just get it. So works for those who are traveling, coming from maybe North Carolina, those who are traveling from the high-rise bridge, but as it relates to residents and motorists who live in the city of Virginia Beach and Norfolk, accessing the hot lanes, the way that you are describing it is going to be very difficult for the motorists who are residents of Hampton Roads, who are actually paying for those lanes.
It would perform similar to the existing HOV hot lanes right now, and our project office is in Norfolk on Tidewater, and I'm personally hoping people get in the express lanes because that helps my commute, because I can't get in express lanes to get to the Tidewater Drive is where I'm at. So that is the theory, is the more people you can shift into the new lanes or express lanes, then the better the general purpose performs. And we are seeing, I don't have the specifics, because maybe Mr. Hall can share some of the performance of the express lanes in that standpoint.
Lady Yancey? Thank you. Jim, just two quick questions for you. Just one out of curiosity, in speaking with a couple of folks in Newport News who had asked this of me, so I just asked this of you. Is it feasible, possible, or each job is different, each project is different, therefore it's not going to be doable, but with the construction at the CBBT, with the tunnel boring that's being developed and brought over for that, is it possible that that same equipment could be used on this project to save a little bit of money, or is it just, it's not going to be feasible?
We are in a procurement, so
Sure, I understand.
so the same contractor that's in Thimble Shoals is in this procurement. I will say this, so the requirements we have an interstate system, so our height requirements are much higher. So we drive a little bit larger diameter tunnel to accommodate the height for interstate traffic. The Thimble Shoals did reduce their height, which, because the risk on these bigger bore machines, the bigger the diameter, the greater the risk. So that, I'm not going to say it's not feasible, but that is what it would have to be designed differently, okay? Because that is a single tube, and it has the ingress, egress corridor, and all of the utilities, everything is inside that tube. If you do what we would have as a twin bore, there's a couple different ways, whether we allow cross passages or not to get between the two tunnels would drive that. So a lot of that's into the technical concepts that they bring. I'm not going to say it's, one way or another. Obviously, any machine that's reused would have to be refurbished, so that would be on the contractor. The other team bored Miami, so they did the Port of Miami, so that machine exists. So I think we will leave it up to the contractor on how his means and methods as we go forward, if either one or both decide to go with the board.
Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman. You had commented earlier about some of the work that's going to need to be done on the peninsula side, specifically in Hampton and Phoebus with the bridge, the cemetery, and then you also have just the challenges of the historical sites at Hampton University. To that point, has there been any discussion with Hampton insofar as what, if any, or if at all, could be used to utilize the Strawberry Banks location, as far as the same sense of what can be used over in Willoughby's Bit, and any kind of improvements to the infrastructure there, maybe even some cost savings in lieu of having to put up some temporary equipment on the bridge? I'm just curious if
Yeah, I mean, right now, we're working with what's in the environmental document, unless we've gone out with this reevaluation to get outside. But by CTB policy and our NEPA document, we have to stay in the right-of-way. So now, and again, I think I would expect that these contractors will try to approach us with technical concepts. There's all kinds of ways to get around that. It may not be what we want, but we will have discussions with how they try to minimize impact to the existing structures.
So one final question, Mr. Chairman, then in light of how much this whole experience has been rather, I think, educational for a lot of us insofar as having to deal with the Army Corps of Engineers, for example, and all the federal laws, and you have DEQ and the rest. It's sometimes easier to have it grandfathered in than it is to have to go back and try an amendment and then put it in. So is Hampton and Strawberry Banks in that area, is that included as part of this right-of-way environmental impact studies, or is that something that we have to go back and include at a later date?
It would have to go back and include it. It is not included in the current SEIS, or record of decision with the federal highway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate all your help. All right, next on the agenda is information C, which our regular meeting, September 20th, 2018 at 12:30 p.m. in this building. And next would be a motion for adjournment. Do I have a motion for adjournment? All right, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Have a great day. Be safe.
Got a few things for you to
Yes, sir. And everything went right quick.